Solving inequalities. Here's the basics. If you remember, the graph gets an open circle if the symbols are greater than or less than, gets a closed circle if it's greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. And what I mean by that is the graph on the arrow. So it's either an open circle or a closed circle. Just looking at some quick examples here. So if I want to graph x is greater than 3, and that's how that's read, I'm going to go ahead and put an open circle above 3. And this means that this graph has to represent all of the values that are greater than 3. So I'm going to make the arrow point in that direction. I would say always put the graph above the number line, because otherwise sometimes it's hard to tell if the circle is open or closed if it's on the number line. This one I would say go ahead and read it from the variable. So we're not going to mess around with switching it from side to side with inequalities because there's a lot of room for errors there. So I would say go ahead and read from the variable. We're going to say x is less than or equal to -2. So if I'm going to graph that, I'm going to start at -2. That's going to get a closed circle because it's less than or equal to. And we're going to go ahead and represent all of the values that are less than or equal to -2. So it's going to point to the left. That's the basics. So now we're going to go ahead and get to example 1, where we have one that's a little bit more involved. So we have to go ahead and solve for the variable first. We're going to do that exactly like an equation. We're going to solve for x. And so I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3 from both sides. Now, one thing you may or may not remember about inequalities is something special needs to happen if I'm dividing or multiplying both sides by a negative, and that is the symbol has to change. So I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by -2, but when I do that, this symbol also has to change. That's only the case when you're multiplying or dividing by a negative. So this is going to be x is less than -2. And when we go ahead and, if you're drawing this number line in your notebooks, I would say go ahead and just make a number line, put the -2 in the middle, and just give me a couple values on either side. So this would be -1 here, and this would be -3 right here. And because it's a less than symbol, it's going to have an open circle, and I'm representing all of the values that are less than -2. So that's going to point to the left. So let's get this procedure down. Step 1 in the procedure, solve for the variable. Here's what's key, is that if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, you have to switch the sign. Step 2 is graph. And what I want you to remember there is when you go to graph, read the inequality from the variable. And we'll certainly talk a little bit more about that in class. Here's the next example. Don't forget, always pause if you need to during these videos. So here's example 2. So I'm going to solve this just like a regular equation. I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2x from both sides. So I have 3x minus 4 is greater than 11. Add 4 to both sides. 3x is greater than 15. Divide by 3. Notice here I do not need to switch the sign at all because I'm dividing by a positive. So x is greater than 5. And I'm going to go ahead and put an open circle above 5 because it's just greater than, not greater than or equal to. So basically, if it has a line underneath it, then it's a closed circle. And I'm going to represent all of the values that are greater than 5. So that means I'm going to point to the right. And that's the gist of solving inequalities. Here's the problem for you to try. So go ahead and solve this and also graph it on a number line. And again, just a quick sketch of the number line, have at least 3 values on the number line. And I will be collecting that from you tomorrow.